This is called Bob and the Bruja. My father's best friend was named Bob Nash, and the two of them were friends from childhood, rapscallions in an old school way. They grew up in Reno, Nevada, or at the time, Truckee, Nevada, by the Truckee River, which is now just a trickle of itself. And they have all kinds of crazy stories from a life living in the desert. They got into fights, they stole alcohol, they drove race cars, they did all kinds of crazy things. And I used to love sitting and listening to them tell their stories. I spent some time with them out in the deserts of Nevada, northern Nevada, where they like to hang out. And they took me gold panning up high into the mountains where we'd scrape rock out of the streams and sift it for bits of gold. They took me out looking for different types of rock because my dad was a bit of a geologist. And so we'd go around and he'd point to different formations. We'd go searching for Indian arrowheads. We'd go looking for beads and coins the settlers had tossed off the train for good luck. One time, they took me to a valley, a sharp-sided valley. And when we went to sleep that night, the valley was just like all the rest of the desert around Winnemucca. It was hard, baked by the sun, rock-strewn, and dead. But by morning, when we woke up and looked out again, the entire valley was covered with gold flowers from bottom to top. That 1 or 2 days a year, the entire valley just rips itself into this glorious array of flowers. And it is the most amazing transformation I've ever seen in a landscape. They brought me down to Area 51. They showed me the signs and the silent guards who stand behind with earpieces and sunglasses and suits, and told me what they think goes on at that secret base. Well, one time, my Uncle Bob told this story. This is called Bob and the Bruja, and Bruja is a Spanish word that means witch or skinwalker. Now, at the time, Bob worked as a lineman for the Santa Fe, the lines that crisscross northern Nevada, carrying boxcars full of ore back and forth. Now, a lineman or a plateman, if you don't know it, they repair the lines. They mark big signals on the side of the nearby structures to indicate where the lines were bad or starting to wash out so the trains could slow down and take it easy and not risk a spill before the lines could come out and repair it. Well, one day, there had been a flash flood, and so my Uncle Bob was out there in a Jeep Wagoneer driving around in 110-degree weather all day, several days, sleeping in his car out in the middle of the desert and then waking up in the morning to continue his tasks. He had a radio so he could call in. He had a can of paint that was so phosphorescent and so toxic, they found out later. But this paint was so incredibly bright, and you could see it from miles off in the pitch black of the desert. And he was driving, and it was getting towards evening, and all of a sudden, Uncle Bob was swearing because his car had just up and died. He was pretty good, handy kind of guy, so he got out of the car and he checked, and the electrical system was completely fried. So he packed up his stuff, loaded it in his pack, and started walking a few miles along the railroad track that he was paralleling so he could get to a rail shack and spend the night there. Well, now, those of you who live in cities don't know this, but the desert is, first off, not dead. There's sagebrush all around for as far as the eye could see, climbing up the hillsides, and they were filled with insects. And at night, they all call, filling the air with a raucous noise. The second thing you might not know is sometimes they all go quiet. And that's never a good thing. And as soon as they all went quiet, Bob stopped walking and he listened. Every now and then you get mountain lions down from Idaho or over from Oregon. So sometimes it was good to pay attention to what the smallest things had to say. And then he saw it. Up in the sky, a shadow blotted out the stars. It was silent, and it moved down, and in swoop, it landed in front of him. Now, at first, he thought it was just an absurdly large condor or other great vulture-like bird, for it had an air of death about it. But with a few blinks of his eyes, he realized there was a person amongst all that pitch black ripped cloth. Inside was a man, gaunt, his cheeks drawn tight against his bones. His clothing looked like it had been taken from the night itself, and he looked at my Uncle Bob as if he was expecting something different in his reactions. Maybe a little more afraid. I mentioned before that they grew up in a different time. They're both really, really old now. My father's passed along, but the world that they grew up in was a world where you could never be weak, where braggadocio was the strongest weapon in a young man's arsenal, and the showing of any fear was an invitation to be victimized. And so they had long learned, both in school and out of school and in the service together, not to ever show fear. So this creature was a little taken aback. It reached up one withered arm to the sky and grasped at the stars, and one by one, they seemed to dim, turning red and then vanishing into the darkness. The creature leered at Uncle Bob and said, "Yes, I am Bruja, witch. The people here buried me in mounds long ago, but they have not taken care of their vows, and now I walk the world again. You, mortal, will be my first meal in 1,000 years." Now, in his heart, Bob's heart was hammering in his chest. It was hammering, but outside he showed no fear. And he looked up at the now completely black sky as if all the stars had been ripped out of existence. And he said, "Well, I understand you're a bit of a big man where you come from, but gotta say, I'm a bit of a big man too. And if all you can do is make some lights go disappear, well, gotta tell you, I can put them back." And he reached down to his belt and he pulled off his walkie-talkie and he said, "Station 818, this is Bravo 18. We are at the 220 mile marker eastbound. Can you light up all the test signals?" And all of the rail lights along the rail for the next couple miles up and down started flashing red, green, red, green, red, green, red, green. And the Bruja looked a little confused. "How did you do this?" it said as it leaned closer. I smell no witchery on you. There are no demons clinging to your feet. Your breath does not smell of secrets eaten from the dead. I still sense a soul tied to those little mortal bones of yours." "I am magic," said the Bruja, "and I do not sense any magic on you." And it lifted its arms from the ground up, and out from the very desert floor came scorpions by the millions, thick-bodied and black, glinting in what was left of the moonlight. They tried to stab through my uncle's boots, but his heavy work boots were meant to stop rattlesnakes, so a few scorpions certainly weren't going to slow him down. My uncle thought desperately for a few seconds and then yawned. "Well, if we're still doing paltry magic tricks, I suppose I could do another one for you." And he reached into his backpack and he pulled out that can of phosphorescent paint. And thinking that it would probably be good to throw some magic sounding words out, he said the only thing that he could think, which was, "Inagata de vida, baby." And he started swinging the can around, spilling droplets of this incredibly bright phosphorescent paint all over the place, splattering all of the scorpions with this day glow yellow paint, and they all lit up. The scorpions and the Bruja were amazed. The scorpions scattered off into the darkness of the desert like millions of little stars hiding into caves and holes and under rocks. The Bruja's eyes were wide and it said, "How is this? It is trickery, I tell you. Trickery. I cannot smell magic on you. Maybe I will eat the meat from your bones and I will tell what your trickery is." Now, my uncle had to think fast, and he suddenly remembered what day it was. So he leaned closer to the Bruja, who did not expect that, and leaned back, and he said, "You see this land here? This land, what does it look like to you? And the Bruja said, it is dead like my heart. It is cold and it is unliving. Uncle said, no, this land is flowers and it is grass. But the people of this land made me so angry that I laid a powerful curse all on them. And for as many miles as a crow can fly in any direction from here, there is nothing but this desert as a sign of my anger. Bruja's eyes grew a little wider, and he said, this is not true. I smell no magic on you, human. But my uncle said, well, gotta tell you, if you eat me and swallow my soul, all that magic that I'm using to push this land to death will suddenly snap back and come right back here and explode, kill us both. So my suggestion is, you leave me alone, get out of here. But if you still don't believe me, I have a way I can prove it to you. The Bruja thought for a minute and said, I doubt you? My uncle nodded and he said, that's fair enough. Follow me. Here's what I'll do. I will remove a little piece of the curse and allow the world that's really here to come back through. But it's going to take a little while. Come on, let's go to one of my places. And my uncle started walking without waiting for permission. And the Bruja followed, floating silently over the darkness of the desert. And on for hours they walked up a hill, became a mountain, and at the top, at a sharp valley, they stopped. My uncle said, what do you see here? And the Bruja shook his head and he said, still nothing. It is still the desert. Show me your magic. My uncle lifted his hands and for the next hour sang every Led Zeppelin song he knew, waving his arms as if they were great spells he was casting. Now, remember that valley I told you about at the beginning? That all happens in one night. There's only 1 or 2 days each year where Paradise Valley turns from its barren self into this raucous growth of flowers. And it just happened to be on that night when my uncle, Bob, brought the Bruja to that mountaintop. And as he sat there chanting his songs and waving his hands as if he had magic, the world itself grew plants from the ground. And as the first rays of dawn hit that valley, the Bruja looked, and all he could see was plants unfurling their leaves, and the golden petals of the sunflowers covering the entire valley lit up and started drinking of the sun. The Bruja's eyes grew wide, and his mouth grew wrinkled. He said, forgive me, Bob the sorcerer. I did not know you were such a powerful wizard. I will flee to my grave and sleep again for 1,000 years so as not to waken your anger. And away he flew like smoke, like ravens, like clouds, into the mounds where the Indians had buried him so long ago. When my Uncle Bob finished telling me this story, my eyes were wide, my mouth was open, and Bob looked at my dad and smiled, and my dad looked at him and smiled, and Dad said, that's nothing. I got better stories than that. Thank you.